There is now over 100 million square feet of empty office space or leasable space in Manhattan. That is equal to 40 Empire State Buildings of vacant space.
And there's a new plan to turn those empty offices into gigantic apartments where people will live with 30 different roommates. 30 different roommates. That's crazy.
Across New York City, rents are taking no prisoners.
Are they considering that we are at a certain income level?
We have too much unused office space and not enough housing.
Renters need to look to the city for help and not their landlords.
But right now, only certain buildings in certain areas can be converted.
Would that hurt you if rent went up by 6 to 9%?
Definitely. My raise may be 2%.
We must remain a place where everyday people can find housing.
We're about to see the model for how New York City can turn its empty offices into apartments, if you're open to living differently.
How differently are we talking?
Let me show you.
But in order to understand why some people think this crazy new plan might actually be the solution to New York's housing crisis, it's important to understand exactly what the city is facing. More empty offices than ever before, and hundreds of thousands of people are struggling to find affordable places to live. Plus, every week, more and more companies are shutting down their offices and moving out.
WeWork, the company that revolutionized co-working spaces, is shutting down dozens of offices, which could put New York City on the verge of a commercial real estate crisis.
And their plan is to close 70 locations, half of which are in New York City. And that's because people don't need to work from offices when they can work from home. But this think tank has a plan for all of that empty office space. But many people are going to think it's controversial because it involves turning these massive empty offices into gigantic co-living commune type apartments where you could have up to 30 different roommates. It's never been done before in New York. Think of it as WeWork, but for apartments. Where you can get a room like this, which is like 80 square feet. This is like a college dorm for adults with a full-time job or students. But supporters of this plan say that it's the fastest way to fill these vacant offices with people. And unless people start using these again, the city is going to be in big trouble. And all these empty offices are causing New York to enter what's called an urban doom loop. In 2019, 90% of office space was occupied. That dropped to 10% in 2020, and it's bounced back, but only to about 48%. And now, because of work from home, companies who normally lease a massive space are downsizing or just closing up altogether. Times have changed. They don't need a massive place for all their employees. They need a smaller space that their employees can use sometimes. But now that these offices are generating less rental income, their values have tanked, and the city's property tax revenue from the value of these buildings has also tanked. Lower property tax revenue means less money for schools, less money for the fire department and the police department. And then crime starts to skyrocket. And in order to make up for the lost income, the city has two bad options: cut spending or raise taxes, neither of which is going to make anybody happy. And the last thing you need to know before we investigate these communal living arrangements is that as people leave the city, offices like this one will have even less people inside of them. And the cycle continues. The value drops further, the city has less tax revenue, crime and stuff continues to skyrocket. That's the loop. But how does this fix New York's housing problems?
Well, multiple people can live here. This is a smaller version of what those empty offices need to become if they want to be turned into apartments.
So this is like what, the common living room, kitchen?
Exactly. And all of the bedrooms share the common kitchen and bath.
But here we only have like a single bath.
Yeah, this is a single bath. In order to work for those big office buildings, this would need to be turned into essentially like a locker room.
Oh, like a whole bunch of bathrooms.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This apartment's about 1,000 square feet. Those empty office buildings are about 10,000 square feet per floor.
Oh wow, so this is 1/10 the size of what everything else would be.
Yeah, exactly.
The game is to make sure we get the zoning to get out of the way so that we can use the creativity to address the housing crisis.
You know, creative is definitely the right word here, because ever since earlier this year when the mayor decided to loosen restrictions on turning offices into apartments, people have realized that it's incredibly expensive and it's probably better to just knock the whole building down and start over. which is also expensive. And that's why most office to apartment conversions result in expensive luxury apartments. Because if you're gonna go broke building something, the people who rent it from you might also have to go broke.
Zoning regulations in the city's central business districts must be loosened to expand the pool of office buildings. But even then, developers have every incentive to jack up the rent to get their money's worth.
Now, the city's new plan has three main parts. First, developer modify these empty offices to become co-living arrangements instead of traditional apartments. Two, make it legal to install interior windows, which would allow you to take a big space like this and make interior bedrooms, which are legal in New York. It's not a bedroom if it doesn't have a window. And three, use these new ideas to turn offices like this into apartments as quickly as possible.
So in co-living, you're only responsible for your room and paying the rent for your room. Unlike if you lived in a 4-bed and if one or two of your roommates didn't pay rent, you'd have to cover them.
So if I rent this apartment with 4 people and 1 or 2 of them don't pay, I could be responsible for the whole rent.
Yeah, you could be.
What's the whole rent for this place?
$8,000. So in this proposed office space, if somebody doesn't pay the rent, you are not responsible for them. You're only responsible for your individual room.
But believe it or not, co-living is perfect for offices that are legally way too large to be converted into apartments. And the problem with an office like this is look at how big and massive this floor plate is. It's super wide and super deep, and all of its windows are on the outside of the building. Inside the building, there's not gonna be any light. It's gonna be like a cave. And to comply with current laws, the office to residential conversions that have happened resulted only when the interior of the building was hollowed out, so now you can have apartments with windows on both sides, but that is super expensive. And generally, when a building does get hollowed out like this, they've got pretty much no choice but to turn these all into luxury apartments to get the money back. And look at this 30-bedroom apartment right here. Instead of hollowing out the core, the kitchens are in the middle and the bedrooms are along the edges where the windows are. And let's say you want to make each of these an individual apartment. They're all going to need their own bathroom. They're all going to need their own kitchen. You're going to be ripping up all the floors. It's going to be a ton of work. It's going to be very expensive. And again, the result of that has always been luxury apartments, especially if you're hollowing out the inside of the building to make interior windows. That's going to save millions of dollars in construction costs, because if you wanted 30 apartments, you'd need to build 30 kitchens and bathrooms, but now you're just building one of each that are really big, like a dorm. But will New Yorkers be willing to live with 40 unknown additional roommates?
So right now, this is an $8,000 4-bedroom apartment. If there was a hypothetical 5th bedroom, every roommate would pay $1,600 as opposed to $2,000.
If you want to get your own apartment with your own kitchen and bathroom, what does that cost?
The average rent for a New York City studio is roughly $3,000.
Really?
Yeah. And some studios will not be much bigger than this bedroom right here.
How big is this?
This is maybe 80 square feet.
So it sounds like what you lose in privacy and autonomy from having your own place, you get back in savings?
Yes. For some people, sharing an apartment might be the difference of having a place versus having no place to live.
Alex, when you rent somebody an apartment and they have roommates, do the roommates tend to know each other? Are they like all childhood best friends? What do we got?
Most of the time, they're not childhood best friends. Typically, they meet on Facebook groups, or they meet through a mutual friend. They're not childhood best friends.
And I'm guessing that a co-working company could do background checks or some other sort of vetting process so that people that rent a room with 40 other strangers feel like there's some process for getting good roommates.
Yes, but what's really interesting is what could happen with interior windows.
Does it come with a free AC?
It might, but I don't even know how you turn it on.
Look at it, it's like outside the window. That's crazy. Is that the bedroom or is this the bedroom?
Whichever you choose.
Oh man, this is pretty cool. It definitely feels like college or something all over again.
So right now, this is a 1-bedroom apartment, but if this proposal turns into reality, you can add a 2nd bedroom right here.
Oh really, in this corner where there's no windows?
So these are interior windows right here.
Oh, interesting.
But the only reason why this is a true bedroom is because of the window right here.
Oh, in the bathroom over here.
So with interior windows, the idea is that you borrow sunlight from other rooms that get it naturally.
So that means that this room, which has no windows in it, would be getting its light from the kitchen windows.
Correct.
There would essentially be a wall here with like a plexiglass cutout to let that light flow in.
So this co-living proposal essentially would expand what you can do with the space that you are given.
So instead of having to like tear all of this down and start over, we can make some inexpensive modifications, whether it's an apartment or an office, and bring more people into the place.
That's the plan.
Do they plan to put in a stove and a kitchen counter?
Absolutely.
Do you think this type of living arrangement is possible for anybody that's not like a single person living by themselves?
I personally think that it needs to be an individual.
But even though these massive converted apartments might not be a great fit for families, they're still gonna help families who need apartments because they're gonna take demand from multi-person apartments that a family would rent. Communal living arrangements are gonna compete with that, and a single person can choose between both and decide which one they like better. Right now in New York City, 40% of renters are living with roommates. And the housing market's so expensive, you'll have 4 software engineers at a place like Google rooming together. Families can't compete with that, the income's too high. But by adding housing options that appeal to people who are gonna live with roommates no matter what, some people are gonna decide that it's easier to get their own lease for their own room and not have to worry about roommates who wanna move after a year or two. They can stay in their own little environment, control it themselves, and not have to worry about finding a new place when they're here to work or do something else, like go to school. Plus, in a co-living arrangement, you're not gonna have to worry about messy roommates like you would at home. A lot of these places have maintenance teams that clean the common bathrooms and kitchens. When I first moved to New York, I lived in a place with a shared bathroom, and the maintenance people cleaned it once or twice a week. That might be more often than you clean your own personal bathroom right now. And all these extra rooms would help single adults who are in the city shelter system finally get their own place. The city shelter system will help people afford an apartment who can't do it already, but when the average rent for something is $5,600 a month, the city just doesn't have enough money to help everybody at that level. And apartments in buildings like this could be a way to quickly take pressure off that burdened system. And proponents of this plan say that it would help New York City with the one thing it needs most right now.
Since this plan would essentially create apartments out of thin air, all of those empty offices that have been sitting vacant for years will now have a purpose. Property values will recover, which is going to be huge for the city and the world renting in New York.
So more property taxes, it's better for schools, better for police, better for fixing the roads.
Yes, 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 and yes.
Now, since most New Yorkers are already living with roommates and there's a housing shortage and rent is way too high, we could pretty much bet that any converted apartment is gonna get snapped up pretty quick. Especially since the potential is there for these to be the most affordable apartments anywhere in town. And that would be fantastic for struggling parts of town like the Central Business District, which is right here. Once these offices start getting used again, that'll create business opportunities to rent out massive stores like this. There's 3 floors here for rent. Together, it's like 30,000 square feet. Right now, no one's interested in this, but if there were a thriving community here full of people, there would be a purpose for this space. But do you think dorm-style living for adults is the secret to fixing housing in New York? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.